Okay. Okay, recording on. So can you all see my screen? Just want to check. Yeah. Okay, so good day all.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us for this series of sessions where we help you get back to jobs, specifically in IT in Canada. And the call is going to be recorded and streamed on YouTube and social media. So if you're not comfortable being streamed or recorded, please leave the session now. This is just a disclaimer to make sure that everybody's aware about the what's happening here. So the community is going to boost your networking. So if you are okay, if you can share your LinkedIn profile in the chat, that would help everybody know you and network with you, grow your network. So this will support everybody. Again, if you're comfortable doing this. So we normally share some practices and skills and knowledge. It's good if you also share yours, and this is always enriching the experience. So feel free to be collaborative, interactive with the speaker, and get to ask questions. We work to help see everyone in the job they love, as well as find and use their full potential. So the code is going to be, Dr. Hamza is going to be sharing some wisdom about his practice. And, Dr. Hamza is happy to engage and be collaborative. So if you want to unmute yourself or raise your hand first to ask questions, we ask just to keep the questions limited to 2 minutes or so, just to give a chance for others to ask questions as well. We run surveys at the end of the call, again, just to listen to you, understand what your needs, and tackle those needs in next sessions. So please provide us your 1-minute survey. It's going to be very quick, not going to be a lot. So we also do a group selfie. Again, use it for marketing and also a memory for this community. So if you can be kind and stay on the camera, that would help us be more interactive in this call. This community is all about volunteering. It's nothing paid here. So if you would be helpful, it would be helpful if you want to give quotas and recommendations to the speaker at the end of the session through LinkedIn. That would definitely provide you also visibility in their world. So what's our promise? Our promise, if you continue attending those calls and applying what you're learning here, you will get hired within 3 to 6 months in Canada for the IT specifically. There is lots of jobs. It's just a matter of sharpening your skills, getting visibility with the recruiters, with the hiring managers, with the right search. And again, we have a YouTube channel that would show you lots of those practices. So there is already some folks who got hired already in the last few weeks, and we'll speak about that in a few seconds. So we will not leave you alone. We'll work with you. So always chat with us. We have Facebook groups, we have LinkedIn groups, and we have Telegram. So be curious, ask questions, attend weekly, show up, and learn and apply what you're learning and teach others. When you teach others, this would help you even better, because when you teach them, this information becomes very easy to you, and when you speak about it to recruiters or to people, then it becomes second nature almost. So our goal is getting 1,000 plus people hired in 2021. It's an ambitious goal, I know, but with what is happening with people coming to these sessions, and if you can make more people to come to this session, then they will get hired. So whenever you get hired, please just let us know. We'll be happy for you. We'll be celebrating for you. I know that there is already 5 plus members from this community got hired already in the last 2 weeks. So that's good news. So please, again, engage, ask questions, join and ask others to join us and connect with the group through LinkedIn. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. You'll get very good videos from different types of speakers who spoke about, topics that is very, very relevant for you to find your next job. So coming up, we have this Thursday, Bring Balance to Your Budget. This is going to be a financial discussion about how to manage your budgets, how to really survive in this world, specifically in Canada as well. So this week is going to be 7 p.m., not 8 p.m., because it's Ramadan, and we will be doing it 1 hour earlier. And Sunday, I will be speaking about LinkedIn 101, how to use LinkedIn effectively to get visibility with recruiters, with hiring managers, and with companies. So those sessions will be, again, posted in the Facebook and LinkedIn group to register. Today, we have the topic stress and its impact on health. So the objective today is understand types of different stressors and underlying mechanisms that cause negative effects on your health and strategies to limit the negative effects of stress. And Dr. Hamza will share actionable steps to limit the impact of stress in your lives. So about Dr. Hamza, Dr. Hamza is a chiropractor with a decade of experience treating and raising awareness about negative impacts of mental and physical stress on the health and function of our bodies. With that, I will hand it over to you, Dr. Hamza. The floor is yours. Thank you. And I will stop sharing my screen.
All right. Thank you, Ahmed. Good morning to everybody who's on the call. I'm glad to be here. I think it's a very apt topic to talk about. I understand from the group that you guys are in that you're constantly getting, lots of information about whether it's the IT sector, about getting jobs and how to be prepared for, interaction with recruiters and prepare resumes. The topic of stress, just as a bit of a disclaimer, as a chiropractor, my specialty is spinal health, and I often deal with people with nerve-related issues from time to time. The reason why we're talking about stress is because there's a huge impact on how your body experiences stress and how that limits you from doing the things that you guys are already engaged in doing. However, I'm not a I'm not a psychologist. I am not a counselor. I'm not a medical doctor. So, the purpose of me coming on here today was to more engage in conversation rather than be the only one talking through the entire time, because I'm sure in that conversation is really where a lot of the insight is gleaned. So the first thing I want to just say a few things for primers, I think, just to guide the conversation for today. I want to talk about stress. There's often a negative sort of connotation that happens when we start using words in society a certain way, and stress is definitely one of them, where I want to encourage us as a collective today having this discussion to maybe not talk about stress as a negative element on its own. We want to encourage you to start thinking about stress as anything else that happens in your environment, or whether it's a mental stress, whether it is a physical stress, whether it's a spiritual or emotional stress. We never talk about eliminating stress. We talk about limiting the impact of it. These are very two different things, because you're never going to have an elimination of stress, whether that is physical or emotional or spiritual or mental. But what you want to do is have strategies in place and things that you can mitigate the way that stress plays a role in your health and in your life in general. So that's what generally I wanted to talk about today. Two things first, before we dive into any sort of actionable steps and open a discussion. When we talk about stress, we can call it physical, emotional, mental, but the stress response, just a little bit of the sort of the functional element behind it, the stress response very much is the same. Whether you have a physical stress over a long period of time, the way that it impacts your brain, the way that it impacts your health is very similar to an emotional stressor that has been there for a long period of time. Our body essentially assumes the same mechanisms when we start to experience chronic stress. And when people are in your boat or in our boat collectively, as what's been happening in the world in the last year, I think this is a very apt and important conversation to have, is like, well, what kind of checks and balances can we have in place so that we are limiting the negative impact of that stress? Some of it, I think, is largely done with building community, which is an excellent sort of thing that Ahmed and you guys are already doing. But there's also personal things that you should be doing that will kind of limit that impact on your bodies and your health over a long period of time. So again, the stress is not so much an issue. It is a very much needed element in our brain development. So if we talk about either a physical or emotional or mental stress, there will be a certain threshold that your body is designed to be able to tolerate. So if I'm going through a stressful period in my life, it's actually something that is nurturing my brain. If I have the right skills and the right sort of tools to manage that stress, I'm actually going to come out of it on the other side in a better position than I kind of went into it. It's a very much needed sort of element of our health. However, it is that prolonged stress. It is that, unmediated stress that doesn't get resolved that starts to cause other issues. And, we can talk about specifically what the needs of this group are, but those elements, those negative impacts, can lead to physical ramifications. If you guys are in IT, or if you're looking for jobs in IT, or if that's been you're predominantly at a working desk, whether that means you're applying for positions, or maybe you've got a job and now you're actually, working 9 to 5 for, 5 days a week. How does that element of just being in that position put a lot of stress on your bodies that can then impact and limit what you're doing at work and at home? And then there's the other element of, that mental stress, and how we can, again, have those checks and balances in place. So depending on what your needs are, we can kind of steer the direction of this conversation to those particular areas. But I definitely want to, if possible, keep coming back to actionable steps, because I know Ahmed can glean some insight into this as well. I know he's always very interested in this topic himself, but also for me personally, I've had the opportunity to work with people primarily with chronic pain, primarily with people who've got pain that is mitigated by or triggered by an emotional stress. So even though my expertise is not necessarily in mental health, I've had decades of experience working with people for strategies that can limit the impact of stress on their bodies. But one last thing before I kind of allow Ahmed to kind of open this up. The analogy that I want to work with today, just as we talk about the mechanics behind stress, is kind of like a country that is functioning really, really well. And for that to happen, there have to be some elements of control. So for instance, you may need one entity that has the skills and authority that can be the leader, someone who can control and manage and direct everyone else on what to do. It doesn't have to be the one that's doing every single activity on its own, but it has to have the control that on the separate groups that will do the work for it. So in our brain, this highly developed region is called the prefrontal cortex, and it can directly help other parts of the brain manage a healthy amount of stress. However, chronic stress, whether that's physical, emotional, or mental, or a long period of time, is kind of like anarchy. Okay, if we're taking an analogy of a country, the authority is completely taken away from this highly developed area of our brain and given to groups that are directly involved in doing the different activities. So if I am consistently stressed and I do not have checks and balances in place, what I'm actually allowing my body to do is go into what we call a flight and fight response. It goes into survival mode. So if that means that you have to lose sleep because you have to get things done, your brain is going to allow your body to do that. It's like, well, I've been stressed, but I haven't been able to get my sleep. Well, we know that's one of the things that's going to counteract the impact of the stress on your body. But your body is in a mode where it actually does not want you to sleep because it is in survival mode. There's so many other examples of this, but definitely what we want to do in this process of checks and balances, if we keep that in our mind's eye, is we actually want to give authority back to the part of the brain that is actually designed to manage that stress really well. And there's tons of tools to do it, sometimes more particular based on what your needs are. But we'll talk about at least 4 or 5 different things that apply to everybody, that if you start doing these habitual things, what you're essentially doing is you're giving that authority consistently back to the part of the brain that is always designed to actually regulate our functions above down. So, Ahmed, you can kind of guide me if you want me to
Yeah,
those actionable steps, or let's open it up and see where the needs are from the community.
yeah.
So,
Thank you, Dr. Hamza. We want to make this collaborative, interactive as much as possible. So, feel free to chime in here, raise your hand, or unmute yourself and ask questions to what Dr. Hamza just mentioned here. Does anyone have any follow-up question, first of all, and then we can guide the discussions?
Yes, Armin, I have a quick question.
Go ahead, Tom.
So, doctor, how can I, for example, how can I identify when I'm like between the good extras that will push me on my activities and the bad extras? Like, what's the break even? What's the point? Okay, now I know it's bringing me in so much problem, so much stress. Now
right.
this is not helping me to do whatever I need to do. Now it's a problem. So how can I identify and look for help?
Okay. So first and foremost, that's very much a self-assessment strategy. Like if you are the type of person who have already taken the time in your, say, your week or your month to set aside time for yourself, where you kind of reflect and self-assess and see where you're at. This kind of thing is always a roller coaster. When we start talking and coaching people on how to identify these pitfalls, most people in the beginning are not very good at being able to identify when that threshold comes where it's no longer a positive stress that is encouraging action, and sometimes becomes a negative or more chronic stress that becomes more of a stress that leads to inactivity and stress emotionally and physically. But it's very much a self-assessment strategy. The way we advise people to do this is ask yourself 3 or 4 standard questions that are applicable to you on a monthly basis. I personally do this on a weekly level. I take 1 hour out of my week, particularly on Fridays for me. But that means I am not at work. I am not at home. Typically, I'm outside somewhere if possible. And I'm self-assessing my week. I perhaps have things that I needed to get done that were on my mind. You can call them stressors, but maybe they were leading me to action. And I do a self-assessment. I say, well, where am I along that path now? Is it something that I am, still excited about? It's leading me to, actionable steps, or is it something that is crippling me, or I feel overwhelmed? And as soon as you recognize that feeling of being overwhelmed or feeling of crippling inactivity that leads to you wanting to step away from these things, that is a telltale sign that you are now reaching that threshold. Now, it doesn't always mean that you abandon whatever you're doing. You go from 100 to 0. The idea is you identify by asking yourself 3 or 4 questions. These questions are usually the nature of, am I still excited about this and this? Is this something that is still bringing me joy? Is this still something that I have planned well for? We'll talk about some strategies, because when we talk about stressors, the problem is we take too much on at the same time. So most of the people that will talk about professional coaching or people that will talk about personal coaching will tell you to take life 90 days at a time. Ideally, if you can take your yearly goal, 3-year goal, 5-year goal, and break it up into 90 days, take on mini projects, maybe 3 things that you're going to do in those 90 days. Our brains, sometimes it's this magic number. Our brains are somehow designed to be able to look at our future vision for 90 days, 3 months at a time, and actually respond to that better than us taking on too much, maybe looking at a 1-year vision or a 5-year vision and getting sometimes crippled and overwhelmed with what we have to do. So we call them Pringle steps or baby steps, but essentially if you can break your goals into 90 days, you're self-assessing every 4 weeks at minimum, trying to see if you are getting to that threshold. It's definitely an exercise. I would say for me personally, it probably took well over 6 months to a year before I got any sort of awareness of where that threshold was for me. But it's a brain activity. So you have to do it consistently, just like any other exercise, and you'll get better and better at it. But you require that self-assessment. Nobody else can tell you this is that magical threshold where now this is a negative stress, whereas before it was a positive stress. But you have to ask 3 or 4 simple questions, reevaluate, and then pivot as you need to over those 90 days. I hope that answers a bit of your question.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah. If I can add to what Dr. Hamza, and also today in today's world, there is so many distractions. So, as Dr. Hamza mentioned, the to-do list is very good. And also what I learned, the not to-do list is very important. So there is to-do list and not to-do list. And those are equally important because, sometimes we got distracted with the not to-do list and we keep doing whatever is not important for us that takes us away from what we really need to do. And that adds stress to us in some level. So I want to thank you, Dr. Hamza. I want to move now to maybe Muhammad. You have a question, you raise your hand. So go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ahmed, and thank you very much, Dr. Hamza, for this nice topic. It's very important for everyone and every time, and it's different from situation to other. I have simple question for this micro question for this topic. For the stress, okay, how I can manage the stress, okay, with the deadline? There is any particular strategy? For example, if I have intensive weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, and I am stressful and I have many deadlines, etc., etc. There is any particular or optimum way to manage this stress in this particular situation?
Yeah, so that's good. We always talk about, our bodies need that dopamine release. It's like, how do you get that? Oftentimes when people are going through, say, 2 stressful weeks, you have many deadlines, you're always working, people will get that dopamine release by coming home and checking out. Maybe they'll eat excessive food, or they'll eat lots of sweets, or they'll eat snacks. Why is our body responding that way? And it's usually because, again, it's looking for some sort of release. It's in a negative manner. So for you, everybody responds differently. But if you are the type of person who can get organized in the sense that not so much for your work, but for yourself. So a dopamine release, for instance, in that kind of a stressful 2-week environment with lots of deadlines, is to actually have a list, just like Ahmed said, is, maybe that's the week where you're overwhelmed with your to-do list. And maybe you're not going to pay as much attention to your not to-do list. Both are very important. But that dopamine release is perhaps a quick check mark. It could be, what we have is we implement this in our practice for our employees, but we have basically a 90-day project planner. And part of that 90-day project planner, on the flip side, is achievements and why. And so that becomes almost a dopamine release. It's like, well, I had this many things to do. I was super stressed to do them, but perhaps you're only getting started. You have 10 things to do. You got 2 done. The thing that's going to give you that extra energy and boost to actually achieve those next 8 with limited stress is taking a few minutes of your time and acknowledging the fact that you got through 2, and then putting pen to paper and writing down why. From a brain standpoint, from a stress standpoint, that is huge. It's a dopamine release that happens. Your body is happy. It's almost we look for self-affirmation from outside of ourselves. We want somebody to give us a pat on the back. Maybe it's an employer, maybe it's somebody that you look up to. It's like, hey, you did an excellent job. And yet we don't do that enough for ourselves. So taking the time and acknowledging the fact that you are actually doing an excellent job yourself. And for me personally, and this is again done through many, many decades, years of research, is putting pen to paper is very different than just thinking about it yourself. So have an element where you maybe on your to-do list, or if you have a journal or something, write something down and say, you know what, this got done, and the reason why it got done was this. And it's the self-affirmation. You'll actually notice a decrease. The more you do this, the more you'll notice that your stress levels will decrease, even through really tough weeks where you have tons of deadlines and things coming up.
Thank you very much for sharing this information.
Yeah,
thank you.
Good question, Mohammed. Anyone else want to join the discussion and raise any questions? Okay, cool. So maybe Dr. Hamza, if you want to share, how can we action now? Like we see signs that we are under stress and we're really, in that mood sometimes. How can we really get ourselves out of that situation? So if you want to share some insights, please.
Sure. So what I will start off with is, again, going back to what I said in the beginning, is no matter where the stress is initiated from, it could be a physical stress because of your environment. It could be an emotional stress because of what's happening at home or with family. It could be a spiritual stress. It could be anything that is prolonged. Our bodies still experience it the same way. So sometimes when I'm making recommendations for people to decrease stress in their life, it's not necessarily related to what's triggering it, but you have to realize the effect of whatever we do, actionable steps of what I'm going to recommend, they have an impact on the way our body will experience the stress, no matter where it is coming from. So first things first, I think I briefly talked about it, but one of them will definitely be mindfulness. There has to be an element of you taking time. If you've ever heard the phrase, stop and smell the roses, why is that so important? You see something that is beautiful, it's going to smell nice, but maybe you're rushed and you're just flying by it and you're not taking the time to actually appreciate it. So you have to stop and smell the roses in your own life, whatever that looks like for you. And the way that can be done is one of 2 days. But we need moments in our life that is almost a reset of sorts. You have to have what we call an anchor. So perhaps say you are extremely stressed at work, but you have a very otherwise healthy family life. Maybe you have kids at home, maybe you've got a significant other, maybe it's your parents, maybe it's your social circle, your friends. Create an anchor for yourself that you are touching base with every week, every 2 weeks, whatever the case may be. That becomes a reset. It's almost like takes you away from what you've been constantly thinking about. It could be the reverse. Unfortunately, sometimes our personal life is the stressor in our life. It could be things at work, things at home with the kids or the wife or the parents or whatever. Perhaps your anchor, which is not something that's healthy long term, but perhaps your anchor is related to work. Perhaps right now your anchor is going to be some activity at work that really gives you tons of joy and that you're super excited about. Maybe that becomes your anchor, but you have to have a moment in time where you take yourself away from the environment that's triggering the stress and mindfully sort of reflect and spend time in a space that is more joyful for you. The other thing we should talk about is sleep. If we're going to talk about the impact of stress on our bodies and our health, sleep is our gold standard reset. Our brains need that. Unfortunately, with stress comes the lack of sleep. I briefly mentioned why, and it's essentially because we're creating anarchy in our brain. We're taking the power away from the area that is designed to authoritatively control everything, and we're giving it to elements that are basically the doers of work. And so if you're going through long periods of stress, you're not sleeping properly, that is the one thing I'd encourage you to actively work to change. Now, strategies for that, we talk about, 8 hours of sleep being optimal or 7 hours of sleep being optimal. In reality, research shows that number varies for person to person. There's an argument on both sides. However, for me, it's not so much the amount of sleep, it's the quality of sleep. Okay. So say you do go to bed at 10:30 at night, but by the time you wake up at 6 in the morning, you've been extremely restless. It's been a restless sleep. Doesn't matter that you were in bed or slept for that long. It's just not going to give you the benefit. Some strategies to get a more higher quality sleep is actually have a ritual of sorts that goes into your bedtime. Oftentimes we're doing stuff. I'm guilty of it. Maybe I've got stuff to do for work and I'm doing it as I am in bed right before I go to sleep. Terrible idea. This is not going to lead to a very healthy, restful sleep. You want to almost have a ritual that disconnects you from any stressor. So if that means it's work related or kids related or family, make sure your kids are in bed. You've got time to yourself before you go to sleep. Maybe you're spending time in prayer. Maybe you are doing some sort of mindfulness sort of exercise, whatever that looks like for you. But you are putting your brain in a more restful state before even going to bed. And the last thing would be our technology is, a lot of people use phones in bed just prior to sleep. And there's been tons of research. And it has to do with the kind of light that is emitted from our phone. So even now there's like, blue light filters and stuff like that people will use on their devices. But there's lots of things. Either you can limit the amount of technology time right before bed so your brain's not so stimulated, or you make sure you're using the right type of filters so that your brain's not getting stimulated by that light. But sleep is hugely important. And again, it's quality of sleep, not so much the quantity of sleep. This kind of ties into the mindfulness, but I'm a big proponent of journaling. And as far as we talk about stress, putting stuff down on paper is huge. Whether that means you have a project planner that allows you to, it's almost, we talk about it like a brain dump. It's like, your brain has constantly got hundreds of thousands of things you're going to think about in a day. If you've got a brain dump where you're going to write stuff down on paper and actually know, your brain almost starts to rely on the fact that now it's on paper, I can stop thinking about it. That's huge. And that almost always limits the amount of stress that you will experience. So journaling or having a project planner, huge impact on that. And the last one I'm going to suggest, and this is obviously coming from my expertise, it's coming from research, but no matter what the trigger is, it could be emotional, spiritual, physical, exercise, or let's say movement. Okay, not so much that you need to go to the gym and work with a trainer, or you need movement. Your body relies, if we talk about what triggers or gives our brain nourishment, our brain, because we are mobile creatures, our brain relies on movement for a lot of stimulation. So if you are spending 8 hours a day at the desk, maybe working to get a job, or maybe you now have a job and you're not taking the time to actually move, you're actually decreasing the brain function. There was a study that was done for kids in school, the same thing. They said, well, is it optimal for kids to be in class for 5, maybe 7 hours at a time without movement? And they said, no, they actually did brain scans, and they said these kids are losing concentration, attention, their efficiency is decreasing, their brain function gets more depressed because they're not moving. So same as applying for us, is if we're spending time in any particular posture, we need to get up and we need to move. Ideal recommendation is 45 minutes to an hour of general movement, mild to moderate intensity. It doesn't have to be like you're going for a sprint, but it has to be continuous movement for 45 minutes to an hour. It could be just steady walking. It could be getting on a bike. It could be whatever it looks like for you. But that is hugely important for decreasing stress. Why? Because it increases our brain function. So if something is causing us to go this way, we need to counteract it by taking it in the other direction. So exercise is huge. And the last thing is some self-assessment. So we know from a mechanical standpoint that the way our body will mitigate stress, and I'm not going to go into too much boring detail of science here, but there's two elements to our nervous system, and one will actually excite us and one will depress us. And they have to work in some sort of harmony for us to be healthy. And one quick way, without even doing too much, to know if you're in this negative space where you're constantly causing your body to be in an elevated stress, flight or fight response, is to actually look at your posture. If you are the kind of person, if you look at yourself in the mirror and you start to see your shoulders are rounding, if your head is forward, if what we say your hips, so anywhere from where your back goes into your legs and your hips, is what we call flexed. It means it's like, you've got this forward hunched posture all the time. This is your body's sign that you're always in what we call sympathetic tone. It means that you're in this flight fight response. It tightens up our muscles and creates this kind of tension. So good self-awareness is look at your posture, evaluate yourself. If you're in that environment, you need to do things to counteract that as much as possible. I think those are the strategies that I had. If there's any particular questions about those, feel free to ask.
Yeah, thank you. So again, everybody is different, in terms of how do they de-stress. So if you're using some specific method, like myself, for example, I used to, do some backyard work. I do some gardening. I do some, raking, shoveling in the winter. with COVID, sometimes it's different or difficult, sorry, because you cannot really do much outside. But I see Muhammad raised his hand, so go ahead, Muhammad.
Yeah, so thank you, Sahar, and thank you very much again, Dr. Hamza. Sorry for my second question.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, do you have any relation or science relation between the oxygen or fresh air with the stress? For example, if you go outside for fresh air for 5 minutes, it can decrease the stress with, for example, 10%, 20%, okay, compared to the indoor air and so on. There is any study about the relation between fresh air and stress to mitigate it?
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Good question. So it depends on your environment. I would say that most people in our current environment, if you're living in a developed country, the oxygenation levels of what you're experiencing indoors and outdoors is not significantly different enough that it'll have a health impact. However, we know that it's not so much the quality of the air that we're going to have an issue with, rather than the sort of the experience itself. So is it okay, even if you've got good oxygen levels indoors, is there still a benefit to have time outdoors? Absolutely, 100%, because the environment changes. Our bodies, again, our brain perceives that in a healthier way. And it doesn't only have to do with the quality of the air, but it's also the sunlight. It's the openness or the vastness of what our eyes are perceiving. If I'm sitting in a cubicle or if I'm in a small room doing work, the amount of air that I'm intaking or the oxygenation in my lungs may not be different, but that experience going outdoors, it changes a lot more that will decrease your stress. So it's a very good question. However, a lot of the research that's done for it is talking about oxygenation levels of our blood. And for that, particularly being indoors as opposed to outdoors, unless, again, you're in an environment, perhaps you're working with chemicals or you're doing other things, or maybe you're in a developing country where air quality is not maintained indoors due to filtering and stuff like that, that's a different scenario. But I think for most of us, maybe on this call, what's going to be of benefit going outdoors is that other external stimulus that's going to nourish our brains and decrease our stress. That's more important.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you
Hamza.
so much. Thanks.
Gopal, you have a question. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I was going to talk about the sleep stress and stuff. Listen, while I'm sleeping, right, I get brain stressed. Right, with brain stress, I get brain activities like electrons, which prevents my sleep patterns. Is there any cure or any recommendation that you can provide, Dr. Hamza?
Sorry, just so I understand the question properly, can you repeat what you said? So when you're sleeping,
Yeah, carry on. Do you want me to repeat the question, Dr. Hamza, or do you want me to give you a suggestion?
Yeah.
But while I'm sleeping, right, I get brain stress. While I'm in brain stress, I get brain activities, electrons from left of my hemisphere to the right of my hemisphere to the front of my hemisphere, right, while I'm getting a different sleeping pattern each night. Is there any cure or recommendation that you can give me, Dr. Hamza?
Sure. So if I understand correctly, are you using some sort of device? I know there's lots available on the market these days that kind of scan your brain as you go into sleep to see how much of a REM sleep you're getting. Are you using some device to assess that?
No.
No. So you're coming to that conclusion just in terms of being under stress while you're sleeping, based on what? The fact that you're waking up at night, or you're waking up early in the morning and not restful? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a very good question. A lot of times, like I said, these days there's watches that'll kind of tell you how your body goes into sleep. Sometimes they're just measuring our heart rate and making assumptions based on that. Other times there's stuff that people will wear. Again, my specialty is not in sleep per se, but I will tell you this: is our brains. There's basically a part of the brain that is supposed to kick in when we go to sleep. And you know, when we talk about even our eye movements, people will say, well, REM sleep, you know, you have these, you know, particular kind of eye movements that are supposed to happen. There's certain thresholds that you should be reaching. The only thing that I can recommend for you is what I had said earlier, is evaluate what your rituals are going into bed. Evaluate, you know, what you're taking with you as you try to go to sleep. A good assessment for that is, do you go to bed and fall asleep right away, or do you find that you're up for a while before your body is restful enough that it actually goes to sleep? If you're getting to bed and you're crashing because you're so exhausted, that's a completely different spectrum. And if you're going to bed but you're otherwise awake and it takes you a long time to go to sleep, that's where you have to do that self-assessment, because something's preventing your brain to actually get into a restful state enough that you'll eventually fall asleep. But you know, like there are people that are very sensitive to sounds. So when they'll constantly wake up, maybe something, that wind is howling, and that's enough for them to come out of sleep and wake up. Other people are deep sleepers. They could be like an alarm going off in next room, but they never wake up. And that's a measure of how much our brain kind of decompresses when we sleep. It's called the RAS part of our. So if you're the kind of person that's constantly waking up, that finds it difficult to fall asleep, there are strategies that you can do, but it usually requires a certain ritual pre going to bed. That could mean upwards of half an hour, 45 minutes for you to get yourself into that space where your brain is rested before you even try to go to sleep. So that's the only insight.
Because to answer your second question, it takes me probably half an hour to 45 minutes to go to sleep. While I'm sleeping, I'm getting sleep jerks as well. I don't know if you want to call it like electron or seizures. Sleep jerks. I don't know if you heard the word called sleep jerks. Like your body goes into jerk mode while sleeping. I do experience that as well while I'm sleeping. Is that common, or is like sleeping jerks, or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, it's common. I would advise you to speak to your medical doctor about it, but it's actually very common. There can be some underlying things that make other people more prone to them. But even in a healthy adult, you can actually have these jerking type movements that happen in sleep. And it's not like there's anything wrong necessarily. It's just, again, how our nervous system functions. You are probably not reaching that threshold where everything is fully relaxed. So what you're actually experiencing are, whatever you want to call them, they're phantom movements. They may be related to what you're experiencing in your dream, or perhaps they're just involuntary movements of the body where the muscle twitches and you move. I would say a high percentage of that is what we consider, not a medical issue, but there can be other things that are going on that may trigger them. So it's always good to speak to your medical doctor about it before you take any steps. But it's very common.
Thank you, Dr. Hamza.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Gopal. And again, just to make sure everybody is aligned. So we recommend that you check with your doctor, your family doctor, for anything that you're experiencing. Whatever we're sharing here today is just based on our experience. Again, in the call, so this cannot be like a medical prescription or anything. So just again, disclaimer for what we're sharing today. But good question, Gopal. Thank you so much. Anyone else want to ask any question here?
I just would like to add something. So I don't know if you ever heard about that, but one time I remember I have read an article saying to every night you have a bad sleep or you don't sleep well, so the average to recover from that, it's almost 3 days. So did you know anything about that? Did you heard?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand. So are you saying if you don't get full sleep,
no, I just because one time I read an article saying every time you don't sleep well one night, let's say, you take at the average to recover from that night, it's 3 days to recover, and your body recover from that bad night. So like
Yeah, it very well may be true. I'm not familiar with that assessment particularly, but like we've always said, even in our conversation today, is sleep is such an important part of our body limiting our stress, but also how we function as individuals. It's not just brain capacity; it's what you're able to actually do physically as well that relies on us resting and having a restful sleep. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that it would take 3 days for your body to recuperate from a really bad, poor sleep one particular night. I think that's very likely.
Yeah. Thank you, Thomas. And again, everybody is different, so some people maybe could have one day bad night, maybe they could recover quickly, but again, depending on your body interactions, I guess, or mind as well.
Yeah.
Good point. Any further question? Anyone?
I am interested to know if I can ask one last question, maybe to the audience, is if there is any particular strategy that somebody's used, if we're talking about the topic of stress, that has worked really well, perhaps that we haven't touched on. Feel free to share it. It has to be something actionable that may be applicable to everybody. But if there's something that you've done that you've seen that has worked, feel free to share that as well.
Yeah, I think from my side, I used to play soccer, and this is what used to de-stress me a lot, because when I sweat, when I, go into that activity, I really get out of any mood, whatever that issue that was stressing me, that used to, get me out of the mood. But now, because, of my injuries and other stuff, so
Yeah.
I'm not really doing that much. But I guess, walking, in an open air and also just, listening to the environment, listening to myself, for an hour at least every day, that helped me a lot. So again, everybody's different, but that's what worked for me. Gopal, you have a question? Go ahead, sir.
Just can you hear me?
Yeah.
I just want to touch on what Ahmed said. Well, before COVID, I used to do a lot of cycling. A lot of playing football, playing tennis, as well as walking. Right, and the only way that would get me into a good night's sleep pattern was the tiredness of my legs, where my legs were unable to move after standing up for a long time or playing sports for a long time, which probably relaxes my brain cells and my body into sleep pattern, into sleep mode as well. If that helps.
Yeah. Yeah. You need some sort of activity, I think, that either gives you joy, and it might not be physical in nature, or something that is extremely physical in nature and maybe allows you to get into that restful place where you can actually get good sleep and wake up refreshed. But these are all very good strategies.
Yeah. So maybe one question, maybe Dr. Hamza, for, again, with COVID, with lockdown, it's tough for us to move on, and we're sitting for a long time. What could be, the best way to, stop that cycle of, sitting for long and moving and getting out of the mood for a while? Would you have some recommendations for us?
Yeah. So if we were talking about this maybe at a time where the weather didn't permit you to be outdoors, I would say there's anything that you do regularly, you need to do the opposite of. So if I'm sitting behind a desk for predominantly the largest amount of my time, I need to be doing things that take me into the opposite direction. So whether that means my head is forward because I'm doing this, I need to be doing stretches in extension. I need to be opening up my chest and my pecs. If I'm sitting the entire time and my hips are flexed, I need to stand up and do some leg swings and get some good movement through my hips. But if we're talking about currently going into spring and summer, there is no better alternative than actually getting outdoors. You don't have to do it in a sort of a gathering of sorts. Yeah. But if that means you're just by yourself and you go out, or you're with your family, whatever is allowed in your current place of living in terms of restrictions, there is no better alternative than being outdoors and simply going for a walk to counteract the stress that your body puts on itself when you're sitting for long periods of time. But if you're not able to go outside, then at the bare minimum, it should be good, healthy leg swings because you've been sitting too long. It should be stretches in extension of your head because you've been carrying your head too far forward, and then working on stretching these muscles called the pecs that are the contributors to us rounding our shoulders off. So we need to be stretching these elements at the bare minimum if we're spending a lot of time on the desk.
Yeah, good advice. And I'm guilty of that as well, so
Yeah.
Thank you for reminding me. Gopal, you have a question, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to touch on what Dr. Hamza said. Right, what I've seen in like a fixed position, right, and what you just demonstrated to us, right, I tend to get like neck pains and upper back pains as well, right, just from sitting in one position, like typing or just sitting. Right, and in the confined space, there's not a lot of movement. There's any other strategies they could recommend us when you're in a confined space?
Yes.
With not a lot of movement going on.
Yeah. So again, I would say counteract what position you're in most often, and you don't need a lot of space to do that, and you don't need to do a lot of movement either. But again, these kind of recommendations are best suited if you're speaking to somebody particularly about your case, because you could have a lot of other things going on that may be causing neck pain and upper back pain. But generally speaking, if when I say use that time to extend your head, it could mean you maybe go to the side of the bed. So you're lying on the bed. If you sat in your desk for too long and you're doing this, essentially it's just lying on your back on the bed and allowing your head to extend back, right? Or it may mean that you stand up and you do some stretches that bring your arms overhead to help with your upper back area. These are very simple things that don't need a lot of space, but it's just basically holding positions for a long period of time. If I've sat at a desk for 5 hours, at bare minimum, I should be doing 15 to 20 minutes of doing these stretches. If I've been at a desk for about 7 to 8 hours, that recommendation goes up to about half hour, 45 minutes. But what these stretches are is just in one position, you are taking your head or your arms or your shoulders into the opposite position of what they've been in. So my recommendation for somebody who does dental hygiene work is if they're sitting down and they're constantly shifted over working on their clients, they need to be doing stretches in the opposite direction of what they were doing when they were working throughout the day. So, to answer your question, it's sometimes pertaining to your condition yourself, but generally speaking, it should always be the opposite direction of what you have been doing at work. And every 4 to 5 hours, the recommendation is 15 to 20 minutes. Anything more than that, that recommendation goes up to about half hour, 45 minutes.
Good point. Thank you, Dr. Hamza. And again, your body movements is very important in your job search journey, because again, if you continue stressing your body, continue stressing your brain, that's not going to help you. So you definitely need some breaks. You definitely need some time off. It sounds like not logical, because you're stretched financially. You want to get that job as soon as possible, but it's definitely worth it, because if you continue pushing yourself to the limit, you will not be able to show up in a good way in front of hiring managers or recruiters or people who are really networking with. So you definitely need some time for yourself to reflect and relax and de-stress from whatever is happening on your mind or your body, to be able to get back into yourself, to get back into your values. So good point, Dr. Hamza. Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions? We are almost on time. So if you...
Yeah, I just wanted to make one recommendation regarding the workplace. Like sometimes, if you're getting like difficult sitting down, it's basically to ask them for special requirements or special adjustments in the workplace as well, to enable to perform your jobs as well. Like maybe you want a soft cushion or like adjusted table or chair at level where you could be comfortable working, if I'm not wrong in saying that.
Absolutely, you're right.
Yeah.
I have also a comment about the question that the doctor has asked, that if someone already experienced something which could solve a problem for him. So yeah, for myself, I have a long history of not sleeping well. So like maybe get awake in the middle of the night, or maybe delayed to go to sleep. So one of the solutions that really works for me is that comparing the status of the small child who is trying to find one of his parents to go to maybe complain or to cry, and then then he will get he will release all the stress. Then he will be able to go to sleep.
Yeah.
So, but for us as adults, we might not find something like that. So what I find as an personal experience is just like something like at night, to have like a special prayers. To just to release all what you have to God, Then after a while, you'll get all this stress relieved, and for sure, this is my own experience. I'm going to sleep, and all this time consumed in this conversation, or this request that you are, or complaints that you are doing. At the end, you'll get compensated. Either you'll get a week without stress and get relieved. So I'm just sharing my experience here.
Good point, Hamza. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
And again, you touched on a very good point. The gratitude is very important. Feeling gratitude, and sharing that you're already thankful to what you have already. This is one of the key things as well to de-stress.
Yeah, sure.
And I think what it comes down to, what you mentioned too, is actually giving up control. We as human beings, in our current sort of awareness of how we live, we often want control in every aspect of our life, and that adds a lot of stress. It's a huge element of stress. So wherever your belief systems lie, whether that means what we were talking about earlier as a brain dump, is I'm giving up control, realizing that I can't do all these things at the same time. I'm going to put it down on a piece of paper. However, and this is again comes down to personal beliefs, but having that connection with where you actually give up control of your thoughts and your stresses and your complaints to somebody above and beyond yourself. So giving that up to God and praying before you go to bed, that is a huge element to de-stress. And it is an activity of giving up control that actually gives us that benefit for sure. Yeah. Good
Thank
point.
you. Any final questions before we end here? So if there is no more questions, we're almost on time. So if you're comfortable coming on camera, we can take that group selfie together, again, as a memory, as a marketing material. So that would be good for our community. Again, we thank Dr. Hamza for all those wisdoms that he shared with us today, and it's definitely good actionable item that we can really practice in our day-to-day activity to help us get back to ourselves. So thank you, Dr. Hamza, for sharing this. Any final thoughts, Dr. Hamza, until everybody maybe join the camera here and can take
I think it's been very nice. It's been very rewarding for me, and I like the fact that everybody was engaging and conversing, because for me personally, I find often when I do these things, it's as much for my benefit as it is for anybody else's. So it's always nice when it is more engagement and communication.
Thank you, Dr. Hamza. So I will maybe count 1, 2, 3, and then we can take that group selfie. So I want to see your great smile, please. So let me just be ready here on my end. So if you're ready, we'll count 1, 2, 3, and smile. Yeah. Thank you all. Thank you so much. I will share this in the chat as well if you want to have a look, and we'll be sharing it also in our social media. So thanks everybody for having this call today. Thanks everybody. Thanks, Dr. Hamza, and
Thank you.
we'll see you
Thank you.
next day. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.